So, hi, my name is Nora Fitzgerald, and I'm a senior at Marymount School of New York.
And my name is Gabby Lennon. And I'm also a senior at Marymount School of New York.
If there are any questions at the end of the presentation, you can send them to us through the chat, and we'll address as many of them as we can at the end.
So last year, our honors physics class at Marymount was assigned to the Design, Physics, and Social Justice project. So our class was split into pairs, and our goal was to research an existing social justice issue and build something using the Fab Lab, or fabrication laboratory, and physics concepts that we had learned about in class to create a solution. Is the echo better now, or? Okay, awesome, thanks. So we are split into pairs, and we had to research an existing social justice issue and then build something using our school's fabrication laboratory in order to solve that problem. And so the problem could be local, regional, national, or international. And the problems that we came up with varied greatly, from domestic abuse to accessibility to everyday objects for the disabled, protection against natural disasters, the availability of clean water in underdeveloped nations, and transportation in undeveloped nations. And we did our best to come up with solutions that would be actually feasible.
So after we had selected our issues, we needed to brainstorm, design, and create a prototype for our solutions. We went through an extensive brainstorming process. The majority of the groups thought of an initial solution pretty quickly, but some of the groups struggled to come up with ideas, so they had to look at different sources for inspiration. One of the main challenges of the assignment was that our solution had to be original. We could improve on an existing idea, but it was important that there was nothing quite like it on the market anywhere. Most of the groups went through many different solutions before settling on one, and after that they had to go through many different designs.
So, for example, one group was researching water filtration systems, and they ran into problems coming up with an original solution, because there are many charities, such as Charity Water, that have projects like this already being created. And so they were going through some books in our physics classroom, and they saw a picture of a man pushing a large plastic wheel up a hill, and had this great idea to create a soccer ball with a water filter inside of it. And so the idea would be that children wouldn't have to walk for long distances with water on their head, which could cause issues to their physical health. And it would be a fun way of filtering water, and it was easy to tell when the water was clean. And so this is called Play Water, and you can see a prototype of it on the screen. Obviously, in real life, it would be bigger and more like a soccer ball.
We were all very excited to move forward to the design stage of this project. And for some of the groups, this was pretty easy. They decided to draw a picture of what they imagined their final project would look like, and they were able to get right to work. Other groups had to seriously contemplate other aspects of their design before they could even get into 3D printing. They had to consider the physics concepts behind what they were doing, and they had to consider all of the different problems that could arise from their design. So there were all these different factors they had to take into consideration, two of them being the effectiveness of their design and the accessibility of their design.
There was another group that decided to find a solution for the lack of transportation in rural and impoverished areas. And they found that a lot of these people use bicycles to travel, but the bikes are often old and worn and not very energy efficient. And so they decided to develop a different type of bicycle frame that's virtually indestructible and much more efficient. And so that required an extensive analysis of energy efficiency and how weight distribution and force work in a bicycle. And they ended up creating a triangular frame that distributes the rider's weight evenly and is significantly lighter than on most regular bicycles.
This group also had to consider material when they were designing their bike frame, which was something that not a lot of the other groups had to think about. So they had to research all different kinds of metals and materials that they could use.
Another group had a project called Aquify Kenya, which you can see on the screen now. And it's another water filtration system, but very different. And they learned that in a lot of underdeveloped nations, people have to add chlorine and different chemicals to their water to clean it. But it's very difficult because they have to put in the right amount. And if they put too little, the people can get sick, but they can also get sick if they put too much. And so they created this filter called Aquify Kenya that you would put on top of a water pump. And then there would be a ring of chlorine in that outer area. And as the water came out, it would be cleaned, and it would just have a time frame. And once the filter was done, you would just switch it and put a new one on. And so this was a pretty clever solution to an existing issue in the world.
So my project actually, my friend Lillian, who's one of the other presenters today, we decided that we were going to look for a local issue, and we ended up finding that there's a garden on the Lower East Side of New York that had a staircase leading to a common area of sorts, and nobody who's disabled, using a wheelchair, or had other issues was able to get to this area. We knew that we needed a solution and that a normal ramp was just not going to cut it. So we had to figure out a way to redesign, in a way, the normal common ramp you would find. We also knew that it had to be cost efficient and that it had to be easy to use. So you can see on the screen here one of our original designs, a nice sketch of what we were trying to think of. So we were considering material. We knew that it had to be some sort of rubber so there's traction. We thought plastic would be a good material to use because it's long lasting and it doesn't break down that easily. And our whole concept was we needed some sort of movable ramp that could be moved to cover the stairs, so you could push someone in a wheelchair up, but this ramp could also be taken and moved away very easily. So we considered the placement of wheels and how it all worked together and how someone would be able to use it effectively in their day-to-day lives. So once the idea for the design had been completed, each group moved on to building the prototype. So what you can see here is our 3D printed version of our ramp. So of course we were not able to build the tiny hinges that we normally would have used, so we used some wire to replicate what it would look like. This is one of the first 3D printed versions that we made. We later went on to add more to the design and to make a better prototype. But we were lucky enough to have the 3D printers at Marymount to do this part of the process. So one of the most important requirements of the assignment was using Marymount's facilities. We're lucky enough to have access to the Fab Lab, or the Fabrication Lab, where we made most of our prototypes. So most of the groups chose to use our three-dimensional printers to make functioning prototypes of their solutions. A few groups chose to use Arduino, which allowed them to create software and use a sensor that added an electronic element to their prototypes. And so we spent a few weeks in class learning how to use all of these different technologies to figure out what would be the most effective way of building these prototypes so that we had a good idea of what it would actually take to make these designs and to represent like what our project was.
So as Nora just said, we spent a few weeks learning how to use the different kinds of sensors and lights and different inputs and outputs that you can use in the Arduino. And so here's a picture of one sort of prototype, but obviously when we actually made the project, you would use a smaller thing like a lily pad. And here's another example of just a simple light that would change color, and you can see there's the wires and transistors and all of that. And when the people who chose to use the 3D printers, they use a design software called Tinkercad, which lets you create an electronic representation of a design using very simple tools. And then it connects directly to the 3D printer, and it physically builds the design. And so that was really easy to use, even for those of us who had never used it before. And so here you can see a preliminary design of my group's project, which was a seawall to protect the city after we were inspired by Hurricane Sandy. And so this was one of our first designs. We then changed it a little bit to this, and then we printed out another prototype that looked like this. And then as time went on, we kept editing and printing and seeing what needed to be fixed. And it was just a very simple process to go through, but there was a lot of work involved. And every group realized that the design was flawed after they printed it.
Yeah, at our group especially, we had to print out multiple copies, each one a little bit redesigned in a way. Some groups had to do calculations, fixed calculations. Some had failed to account for the limitations of the 3D printer. Some had made their designs a little bit too big or a little bit too small. What we were really aiming for was an easy to use and an easy to look at, I guess, representation of what the design entailed. So after making changes on various prototypes, a couple of groups ended up with a project that solved the problem in a completely different way than they had expected. They'd gone through so many changes and had realized so many different situations that they hadn't even thought of before. But some groups ended up with prototypes that looked exactly like their initial sketches, and they were able to go straight on to the next step.
And the entire time that we were working on this, we kept track of our progress using Innovation Portal, which allowed us to monitor everything that we had done and what our thought process had been along each step of the way. And so when we were nearing the end of the project, it was really interesting to see how our ideas had changed over time, and it was really useful to have that where we could log into Innovation Portal and see all of our sketches and what we had been thinking and things that other people had done in the world. And then we also used Weebly to create websites to sort of advertise our projects and to keep all of our information out there so that other people could see what we were doing and sort of be inspired by it.
So as January came to a close, each pair had finalized their design, and we had to present to a panel of judges. So this panel included Ms. Mackenzie Hamilton, the upper school divisional head, Mr. Buckley, the co-founder of the non-for-profit Tools at Schools, and the author for Pearson's interactive science program. It also included Sister Clevey, who is the head of our religious studies department. So each presentation could only be 2 minutes long, so we had to get very creative about how we were going to most effectively tell people about what we had designed and how it was going to work. So groups did various different projects and had very different presentations. For example, the group that created Playwater wanted to make a statement about the functionality of their solution, so they took dirty New York City snow and filtered it using the filter that they had designed and drank it for us in class, which was a very effective way of proving the feasibility of their solution. In the end, a few groups elected to continue with the project and bring it to the marketing stage. So each group that decided to move on was combined with a group that had decided they'd reached the end of the road for their project. And once we had made these new groups, we just started trying to create a unique marketing video for their product. So some filmed themselves talking about the product, some used voiceover on pictures, and some made animations. My group, for example, made an animation showing how our ramp would be used and how it would function with wheelchairs. And some groups filmed themselves, actually, like Playwater, for example, filmed themselves with the prototype that they had made explaining how it would be used. So from there, we entered the patent stage of the project, which allows us to use our marketing skills. We went through the process of figuring out what kind of patent we would need and how you actually filled one out. We filled patent paperwork, which was then reviewed by a Marymount alum who works as a patent lawyer, who we were very lucky to have help us.
And so this is such an important step in this process because it shows that what we do in class has an influence on the outside world. And we didn't just do the project so it could sit on a shelf in the Fab Lab and, you know, collect dust or just when prospective parents come to the school, we could show it off and, you know, use it as an example of how great we are. But we wanted to have it actually change the world. And I also love this project because it changes the way that you think and it changes the way that you approach problems in your life. And you start to think about how you could build things with the Arduino or the 3D printer to actually fix things, and it makes you think like an engineer. And it also helps you realize how much you're capable of doing, because there are so many things that I built in honors physics last year, and in engineering and interactive design, my science class this year, that I would never have dreamt that I would be capable of creating. And it's especially important to empower students in an all-girls school because there's a serious lack of women in science and technology, and projects like this make it very clear that this sort of new maker revolution that's happening is giving the power to create to anyone who wants it, which is, yeah, it's empowering and it's inspirational, and it's definitely affecting my life because I want to major in computer science and become a computer programmer.
It also allowed us to see how everyone in our class thought about things. The projects were so varied and covered so many different issues. And, you know, watching each other's presentations, we learned so much about all of the different things that are going on in the world. You know, we covered topics from water filtration to transportation, and everyone had a different view. Everyone had a different way of saying, this is the problem, this is what we're going to do to fix it, and this is what we came up with, which, as Gabby said, was empowering in a way. You know, watching girls your age stand up very confidently in front of a group of judges and, you know, say, you know, we made this, this is something that we did by ourselves.
It was also really important to have teachers who supported us through this whole process because no one told us, you can't do that, you can't try that, it's not going to work. It was always, let's give it a shot, let's see what we can do, let's do research, let's work, let's, you know, spend hours in the Fab Lab building prototypes and programming things and doing research and seeing what we can do. And it was really, really interesting to have people encourage you in that way, to have people, even if your idea sounded crazy, to say, all right, let's try it, let's see what we can do. And that was really, really nice to have. It taught us a lot about what it's like in the real world to create something and then actually have to go through the process of making it and presenting it to people and saying, you know, this is what we've done. So going through the design stage where you really had to get down and say, what is it that we're trying to do? What is it that we're trying to make, and how do we do this? It was a physics class, which meant, you know, we had to incorporate, you know, different theories in physics and think about, you know, real-world applications for everything you're learning, which meant at the end of the year, we all had a better understanding of physics. And the fact that it was combined with social justice, which is a big part of being at Marymount, that combination really meant that you had to think about the real world, because in the real world you aren't just doing physics, you're doing physics with a purpose. You're not just doing social justice, you actually have to make things that work. So the design stage really helped us do that. And, you know, making the presentations was just the next step. And it was like the adult way that you would go about. Yeah, I also got to speak at the Make Education stage at the Maker Faire this year. And so the picture on the screen is from that event. And that was a crazy event because it was educators and it was scientists and it were people who, adults who were working in this field who wanted to hear what we had to say and wanted to hear. And this conference is another example of that sort of thing where it's people coming together to actually change the way that science and technology work in the classroom. And that to me is just so important. And when we got to the Maker Faire, even before our presentation, people were coming up to us and saying, I want to talk to you about this project, I'm so interested. And people told us we apparently beat out a lot of other groups for that time slot on that stage because it was a hotly contested thing, and people wanted to hear what we had to say. And I guess I'm still realizing that this is such an important thing that we're doing, and that we need to just keep talking about it and keep doing it. And this year the honors physics class is doing the same projects, but they're approaching completely different projects in completely different ways. And it's just so inspirational to see that this continues and that other schools are now joining in, and it makes me very proud to see what started in our class and is now spreading.
This project, I think, also inspired a lot of other projects that are going on in Marymount now. I know that in a lot of our classes, we're doing interdepartmental projects trying to combine, not just physics and social justice, but, how can we help the younger grades learn how to use all of these different technologies. And being able to show younger kids, like, I made this on the 3D printer, this is what it's going to be, this is what I designed, this is what we're doing, is a really good way to inspire the younger generation to, decide, I want to do technology, I want to do science, I want to make a difference in the world. I know that for me, it was a really big deal to do this project because when my group was trying to find what problem we were going to focus on, we were looking around and everyone was saying, oh, I'm going to look at Kenya and water filtration, or I'm going to look at this country and their issues with transportation. But Lillian and I looked very locally. My mother actually works at the local community garden that we designed our ramp for. And I went to her and I said, have you seen any problems? Like, what can we do? And she said, we do have this issue with disabled people not being able to get to this common area, not being able to see all of the different things we do there. And I think that this is a big problem in society as well, not just at this one specific place. So we were able to actually go there and see, what can we do and what can we do that is not going to be difficult, is not going to provide more hardship. So going through the design process, we didn't just look at, how is this going to work in terms of physics? We had to say, how is this going to work in terms of the people who are actually going to be needing this? And I think that, every group at some point had to consider that, when they thought of play water, it wasn't just, oh, water filtration. It was, we know that it's kids who are going to have to get water. We know that these kids are walking miles and miles to get clean water for their families, and the water just isn't that clean. So how can we make this fun and interesting? So there was like a really big human component to these projects, which is where the social justice tied in.
That was exactly the same thing that my group went through, because we were inspired by the destruction that we saw during Hurricane Sandy, and that there were students at our school who suffered just horrible, horrible things because of it, and it really, I guess it hit close to home. And when we realized that we could find a way to help in some way, we wanted to. And our original design was completely different. What we originally wanted to do was create emergency lights for stairs in apartment buildings. And we wanted to use I think it's called the piezoelectric effect, where we could harness energy from people going up and down the stairs and then have it be set off when there's an emergency and you lose power, so that people aren't getting injured, because we saw, elderly people and sick people having to walk up flights of stairs with candles, and it just was a terrible situation for everything. But then we found that there was a group of scientists already working on something very similar to that in the world, and we didn't want to just be, copying them. The project had to be completely original, and so we just started from square one. And then we were thinking about ways of pumping water up to high apartment buildings, because when you lose water in an emergency, that's just a terrible thing. And we were trying to find ways of using like capillary action and things like that. And then, again, we found projects that were similar to that. We wanted to be completely original. And so we've noticed that there's lots of different kinds of seawalls, but we wanted to make one that was much more effective and would work in an urban place like New York City, so that something like this didn't happen again. And we did a lot of research, and we built prototypes, and it was a really interesting process to go through, and there was a definite human component because we had seen people suffering, and we wanted to stop it. And the fact that this project happened so soon after Hurricane Sandy was a huge influence on what we decided to do.
Yeah, I know that when we of course all witnessed each other trying to come up with designs and make these projects feasible. And I remember watching Gabby and her partner, Michaela, going through this process and them saying, apartment buildings like during Hurricane Sandy didn't have any lights. Like, what can we do about that? And just the process of watching them go into class every single day and just sit there and they would talk about it. And it was just a very interactive process, and they would, turn to people and they say, well, what do you think about this? How would you go about this? And when they finally settled on seawalls, it was a completely different project, but it was much more feasible, and that only came about because they had this collaborative and productive group work ethic, and they had the inspiration and help of people in our class and people around the world, and they also had the technology to actually research this and do it.
One of the girls in our class had previously hated science, and she was very vocal about this. And during the course of this project, she began to really love science, and I'm friends with her, and she is now going to major in physics or computer science and wants to actually pursue a career in this. And I know that Mr. Walters was very proud about this happening, and it makes me so happy to see things like that, because sometimes people think they hate subjects just because they haven't been taught them in a way that speaks to them, and that this project allowed you to approach physics and technology in whatever way made the most sense to you and worked best for you. And that was really great because everyone enjoyed it and everyone did something different, and people were writing computer programs, and people were actually physically building things, and people were designing things on the 3D printer, and it was just, you could do whatever sort of made sense to you, and you would learn new things, and it felt the way that a science class should feel, rather than forcing everyone to do the same thing, same way, and it was just so much more open, and that was a really great thing too.
Yeah, it took away a lot of the limitations that I think people felt before going into this project, because I know that I myself was looking at this project and seeing, months of work that might not end in anything good, and it was a daunting prospect. I was like, there are so many issues in the world, how could you choose just one, and how could you come up with a unique solution? But doing the project myself and watching everyone else go through it was really eye-opening in that way, that I said, we can do anything, which sounds cliche, but it really did come true. If you saw the project that everyone in our class came up with, you would have no doubts that they could come up with anything, they could do anything that they wanted. And I know that it actually, this has spread throughout our school. I've been in other classes where instead of just doing, a simple presentation about something, we've actually been told, think about it a different way. Think about how you could use the other subjects you're taking to make this better and bigger and more applicable to the rest of the world. And this is spread, throughout the grade levels. like these projects have been shown, I think, to most of the school, and I just hope that there are younger students looking up at us and saying, you know, I want to do that. I want to start designing things and making things that could change the world. And everyone went at it in a different way, which I think is great and shows like what everyone can do. So right now, we've kind of said what we wanted to say about this project, but if there are any questions or anything you want us to elaborate on, we will start answering questions. I see that there's one question, could you have done these projects without a 3D printer? The 3D printer, I think, was pretty integral to the way we approached the project. Of course, it could be done without it. It would just take some imagination. I know that for my project, there were some parts that couldn't be printed on the 3D printer. It was just a little bit too complicated. So we used other materials and things around the classroom and in the fab lab. So I think it could be done without 3D printers. That was just a resource that we had and we're really lucky to have. So yeah.
I've also seen students at schools do projects where they just build prototypes out of things like cardboard and different art supplies that they have on hand. So it's not, you don't need to have that sort of high-level technology to have people start thinking about inventing and start thinking about building new things. I mean, like Nora said, we're very lucky to have that, but you could sort of adapt this project for different levels based on economic status or based on anything really, age level of the kids involved. It's not limited to just, private all-girls school on the Upper East Side. I see also the question, what were some challenges you encountered in thinking about social justice? Finding the issue, like Nora said, there's so many social justice issues in this world, and luckily we go to a Catholic school that is very big on teaching us to even have a class on social justice in 10th grade. So we had spent a year studying issues from, human trafficking to poverty to anything really, and that had sort of opened our eyes. And we had worked with charities before, which was also a good experience for getting ready for this project. So for example, I worked in a group with 2 other students where we went to a charity that teaches children in impoverished areas how to build boats, and it's used as a sort of way of getting them off the streets and giving them inspiration and role models, and they can have tutoring. And so then we got to advocate on behalf of that charity, and we won a grant for them, and it was sort of, so after a year of that, we had more experience using social justice in the classroom. And that is a good point, that if we hadn't done that in the past, it might have been harder to come up with issues, and that before this project should be attempted, the students should have experience learning about social justice issues in their community and the global community, and then be able to actually think of solutions.
It's also really key that the students are passionate about what they're doing. This is a really long process, and it's very interesting, but it helps when you have not necessarily a personal connection to whatever you're doing, but that you are invested in it. You want to bring this project as far as it can go. I see that there is a question if students continue to work on these projects independently outside of school, or if it was a school project only. I think that most of the projects were brought to at least the patent stage. We did file for patents, but there's only been one project that was brought any further than that.
And while I don't know if we're allowed to talk about them, that one because it's in the patent stage.
Yeah.
But while we were actually doing the project, a lot of it was done in class at the beginning when we were just getting used to the idea and we needed a lot of guidance. And then as we got better and as we sort of solidified our ideas and figured out exactly what we wanted to be doing and how we were going to do it, then we moved more outside of the classroom, and we would have meetings outside of school or staying late after school to just, you know, hang out in the Fab Lab and try things out and stuff like that. But in the beginning, there was a lot of guidance, and then there was less and less as we sort of gained the ability to do the project on our own.
Yeah, I was going to say that all of the 3D printing was done on our own time, and much of the prototype process was done when we had frees or after schools. There was also a lot of the design process happened in class, but we were constantly thinking about it. This project really did become like a big part of our lives at that time. So 3D printing was done on our own time, and of course working on the presentations and making them was done on our own time. So yeah, I know that there's that one project that's moving on, but I'm not sure that we're supposed to talk about where it's going at the moment.
Awesome, thanks. So we were, that project was called Petty Text, and it was to solve the issue of domestic abuse. And the idea was that it was a teddy bear that if you clicked a button that was inside of it, it would text 911, because that is something you can do now. And the idea was that if say a teacher was worried about one of her students and was worried that that student was being abused at home, it would be a sort of very subtle way of empowering that student to be safe and to protect themselves. And if they were in danger, they could ask for help and they could save themselves without their, abusers knowing. And so that was a really interesting thing. And the last I checked, they were looking into pitching it on the TV show Shark Tank, which is really interesting. And it's just so cool that it just keeps going, the project. And if you build something that makes sense and that can be used in the real world, you might as well pursue it. And that's really interesting. So, yeah.
I also know with that project, there was a lot of consideration about who they were marketing this for and how that process would work, which meant that they actually had to do a lot of research into domestic abuse cases and what legal rights do teachers and people in positions of authority have to make those kind of decisions, and how a student would react and what would be most comforting to them. So I think that was like a really interesting project they did, and they had to do a lot of work in terms of that process. I also, I see that people are talking about middle school applications of this project, and I would just have to say that's exactly what we're aiming for with this presentation, that people start assigning projects similar to this to younger students, because that's really the goal, is that younger kids aren't, cutting themselves off from science and technology and math, that they're saying, I can use this, I can do this, I can really make something out of this. And I think that, you'd be surprised at what middle school kids will come up with and what they will be able to do. 3D printing is pretty easy once you are taught how to do it, and I think that younger kids would love the experience.
I see the question, were your projects primarily focused in your physics class, or did you have any connections formally with other classes? And it was primarily in our physics class, but we did work with the social justice teachers and the religious studies department, since we are a Catholic school, and we also worked with the teacher of the engineering class. And some groups worked more or less with them based on what their project was, and I know one of the groups that was using a lot of computer programming had to work a lot with the engineering teacher just because they didn't have any experience in that field and they had to learn how to do it. So it was primarily in our physics class, but we worked with religious studies in order to get used to charities and understanding how people go about solving social justice issues on the large or small scale. and working with the engineering teacher in order to learn how to actually build solutions for their problems.
Yeah, and I think that's like a really big deal, was that there were so many people who were available to us to help us and to guide us through this process. Like, it was a very independent thing that we were doing. It was all our ideas. It was all our passion, what we wanted to do, but there were people there who we could go to and say, you know, I've never used an Arduino before. How do you do this? And somebody would step in and say, you know, I'll teach you how to do this. And they would take their own time to do this for us. And I know I've done other projects in school that crossed class lines, I guess you could say. You know, art history classes, working with Latin classes, making projects for younger grades, so that we could show them what we've been doing and not only teach them how to use the technology, but also teach them something relating to what they were doing in class.
Oh yeah, our school is very big on sort of interdisciplinary projects, and everything from, like Nora said, we're learning to make apps and then using them to teach the younger students, you know, different things, making simple game apps for them to learn, you know, letters or numbers or things like that. And then things like, I know in the data visualization class, I think the teacher is working on finding a way of conceptualizing all the mentions of flowers inside of the book Mrs. Dalloway in order to see if what the relevance was that to sort of easily show the relevance of something, that a symbol that occurs throughout the book. Like things like crazy projects that whatever you can think of, you can work with teachers from any discipline to deal with, because everyone is sort of interested and everyone is really enthusiastic about technology in our school. And so in a lot of classes we've had going to the Fab Lab. I know I'm in a creative writing class right now, and we're writing haikus, and now we're going to go and find things like leaves and stones and use the laser cutter to burn the words of our haikus into the objects from nature. So we just do all sorts of interdisciplinary projects in our school, and it's just seen as a sort of
standard.
Yeah, a standard thing.
And I think that that's really important, was that this project opened the door, I think for my grade especially, to these kind of projects, and it really did make it a normal occurrence, because it was such a difficult prospect, I think. You know, social justice and physics, you'd think that those two things were as separate as can be, and I think a lot of times in schools they are presented as that way, but this really showed us how much you can do and how easily you can combine these two subjects. And as Gabby said, a lot of our classes are now trying to do that sort of work. I know that, you know, in the very simplest of cases, you know, you learn about something, and instead of just making a presentation or writing an essay, you make a video that can then be shown to a different class, so that you're not even present for your presentation, you're just giving them something that can be sent to everyone.
And in your AP Physics class, right, you're making sort of like textbooks for the next class to use.
Yeah.
I've seen students working on that where they're making their own practice problems and explanations and recording themselves talking, and in order to give the next class of AP Physics students sort of extra resources and extra ways of approaching things, and, you know, maybe the way that, you know, Nora teaches a topic will be easier to understand for one student than another, and it just, that's a really interesting way of, it's an actual useful thing to create that will continue to be useful even after we graduate.
I think, yeah, this project that we're doing right now, making these review books, has been very challenging in many ways, but there's sort of a double good effect from it. You know, I've learned so much more about this topic of physics that I have, and I've learned all the different ways that you can approach teaching this topic, and that really means that, you know, someone next year could look at this and say, oh, I didn't understand this at first, but when it's presented this way, it's much clearer to me. And it just is like there are two levels of how much good this can do.
We also try to incorporate this sort of technology and social justice thing in a lot of ways in our school. And so, for example, the Student Technology Leadership Team, which is running this conference, every year we 3D print ornaments on the 3D printer, and we make stickers on the laser cutter of different monograms, and we put them onto ornaments, and then we sell them, and we donate the money to Zimbabwe to help people in Zimbabwe, which is, it's a fun project for us to do, and people like to, you know, buy them for their Secret Santas, and it's a cute thing, and it gives us practice using the laser cutters and using the 3D printers, and then it actually helps the real world. And so, you know, freshmen can do that, and younger students can do that, and then they're sort of getting their foot in the door of this science and social justice project that they will then do later on.
So we've kind of covered the project that we did, and we've given examples of other projects we've been doing. So if anyone has any final questions, we'd be happy to answer them. But as it stands, we're finished.
Thank you, though, for coming, and I hope you guys, you know, learned from it.
And I hope you were inspired to do something similar.
Yeah.